know some boatmen that have been terrible all along. They just can't get good.
Yeah.
They don't read the water very well and stuff. Like I'm one of them.
Right.
Where's the water going? What am I doing? This thing, it feels like I'm using the wrong hand.
What mile are we here, Captain?
Let's see here. What are we? We're at about
21, 21, and 22. Okay,
I'd put it closer to just under 121, huh?
Yeah, 122 mile.
Is that next bend down that camp?
Yeah, it's a little ways down there.
Yeah, I'd say just under 121.
Beach is running down again too.
Yeah, this is nice.
Boy, I don't. Power tools always scare me because they're all going so fast and they're so sharp.
Power tools?
Yeah.
You know, actually,
I like driving semi-trucks too.
yeah.
I only did
Power
that once. That was
power
fun.
tools are scary. Outboard motors are scary.
Yeah.
Or they can be.
Yeah. Any kind of engine.
I was once running Dubendorf, and I went through the slot. We were doing these one boat sand survey, beach survey stuff, and it would they'd let us have 5,000 or less, and then we'd have to go from place to place, do all the survey work, and then we'd run out real fast. So I had 8 surveyors and myself on this snout boat. It's raining, and we're coming down on the run out. We were reach 2. We got all our work done, and so we were running out, and we're on low water, real funky situation there, and I kind of make it through the slot. I'm in a snout boat, just these things with a frame in between them, and the boat catches its nose in the back current and spins around, and I had picked the motor up to go down through the slot, and I'm holding it up, and I go, well, I got to get out of here. So right as I put the motor down, the motor goes down like this. It hits a rock and breaks it off the saddle vertically like this. So I'm already down there putting the motor down, and then I, just drilled it into the rock. And so as it broke off the saddle, the thing just came up into my arms like this, and I turned around, and all the people are looking back at me, and I just turned around with the motor like this and said, I don't think this is very good, as we go bouncing down it was still running.
Yeah, well, that's, I was thinking, just the thing to hold in your arms.
Really?
It was so funny.
I remember turning it off while it was in my arms.
Well,
Like,
that
I think
was
I'll
good.
turn this off.
Say here.
Really.
You want to see something really scary?
Yeah, turn it
Anybody
on.
want to shave?
You want to see something
You want
really
to shave and a
scary?
haircut?
So are we rolling? Here we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is the River Runners Oral History Project. It's now must be a year now. We've been on this trip. September 19th, 1994, and we're here at 220 with Brian Dierker, and that's Dierker, right?
For the credits?
Yeah, no, that's for the transcriptionist.
Yeah. Dierker. And Brian, Brian.
And so what I've been getting everybody to do, I'm gonna have to sit you down again at some point. Like I wanna get to all of us, kind of our class,
Yeah.
and really get into some of the good stories and all that stuff at some point. I think we might as well set them down just for the hell of it. I think there's ones I want to hear about, like the time that you upran Crystal and some of that stuff that probably we don't have time to get in. Right now, what we're going to need is we're going to want to focus our discussion kind of toward this trip and these guys and all that.
That's
stuff.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
But pretty soon, like within the year, I want to, I want to get a rain check from you and really sitting down and having a long old visit. But what I've been getting all these guys to do anyway is just kind of give a brief resume of just kind of a little bit about your background, and then how you got hooked into the river in general. just to give perspective to
Uh-huh.
what you might have to say about this stuff. So,
Well, I guess I did my first trip in '70, and I did it with Dick McCallum. It was his first trip as Grand Canyon Youth Expeditions, and my brother Dan and myself were given the opportunity by my mom to go on this river trip. It was a small trip as a one-boater, one snout boat. The new concept of having the multiple oarsmen on the snout, and
that was the, wait, time out, I gotta get this.
yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And we went down on I think it was a 22-day trip, and we had a lot of things go on the trip. It was Dick's first trip as an independent company. It was a non-profit company. He had just broken up with Ron Smith in expeditions, Grand Canyon Expeditions, and wanted to do educational type participation oriented trips, and actually that first trip was quite a hodgepodge of different people. We had a kid off the reservation named Nelson Yazzie. We had a few teachers on the trip, one from the university, Barney Anderson, from the high school, Jim David, a biology teacher, another teacher, Ted Layton from the grade school area, and then my brother Dan, myself, Dick McCallum. We had a professional photographer by the name of Ted Whitmoyer, and I think that's all of us. And it was an incredible experience to start with, because it was kind of a rare trip as far as approach, with a snout boat, 4 of us rowing, and then Dick was in the back there on a sweep. And from that point on, I knew, I was going to be doing this. I loved it, and so the next year I did a couple trips. I ran a 10-man through with Jim David, and then I guess I did another youth trip that year, and then the following year I did about 5 triple rig trips with a guy named Don Neff, and got paid for it. And so, by the time I was 15, I was making $10 a day as a professional river guide.
Now, how old were you that first trip that you did?
13.
13. So you guys were big even at 13.
Yeah, we were large boys. My brother Dan was, I guess, 17, and he was graduating from high school, and I was in, junior high or whatever.
I wonder why your mom thought you should go.
She needed to get us out of the area, I think. No, my mom, Dottie, is a real major force in my life. She's probably one of my best friends, and I look at some of the stuff that she's done, and I really appreciate it, because she's I don't think, as far as Grand Canyon, she knew how overwhelming the focus I would end up with would become. It's all I've done really since she sent me down here, and of course it's ruined my life. Nothing has really mattered to me other than this, and I'm a mess. Thanks, Dottie. But she's a pretty remarkable woman in that she, I think, wants, the most for her kids, and she knew that we were kind of outdoor kids. We liked the outdoors, and it seemed like a good thing for both Dan and me. My brother Dan and I have a really neat relationship too, and well, he's my personal hero. And the Grand Canyon has definitely allowed us. Now check this out. Yes. Did you get that on? Could you hear the
oh,
could you hear the body contact?
We got it.
But I think the Grand Canyon has really been a solidifying growth thing between my relationship with Dan also. He didn't run the river for quite a few years after that first trip. I jumped into it, and then he kind of came back into the loop. And yeah, we've always had that in our lives, kind of shared the different components and the different growth that goes along with being here for so many years. But Dan particularly is, I think, a remarkable boatman that kind of came out of those early 70s, like you know.
Remarkable guy.
Yeah, he's pretty cool. He could twist your head off in 30 seconds, Lew. Barehanded.
I don't think it would take 30 seconds to you.
The wedge. But and then as things went, the complexity of the company, like all the other companies in Grand Canyon, started changing things. I think I did my first lead trip at 16 when McCallum just sent me downriver with a one-boat trip. I had like 6 gals on the trip and a couple big, strong guys. And I remember getting down below the cable, and I just thought, let's go. I am on my own here. And so I did a lot of youth trips.
What kind of trip was that? Were you
It was a
on your
youth
own?
trip
So
in a
they were
snout.
rowing?
Yeah,
So-
the
and
4
you-
oars. We had 8 people on the trip, plus me. And so you had 2 full crews to row, and that was the trip. We ate Richmore freeze-dried food. There was no bread. We had pilot biscuits, but no beverages, none of that. Powdered Kool-Aid Dick would send. No tables. It was a participation orientation to the trip, and it was a one-boater.
You mean it was a one snout boat, and you were it?
Yeah,
Running the sweep
I
and
was
they-
on the sweep, and then you'd go starboard port, hard starboard, hard port, back paddle, together hard, kind of the terms of, you ran the boat kind of like a motorboat, really. But you didn't really have, of course, the control that you have with a motorboat. At House Rock Rapid, it was terrifying. There was no questions asked. Either they were, it was just like, I pleaded with these people. I'd get them in a circle and talk about unity and teamsmanship. And it really grew me up in a hurry doing that. And I look at McCallum and think, what were you thinking? Sending somebody downriver with these people, but it all worked out pretty good. We had a lot of pride as far as how the boat looked. I think that was always one thing as far as, you had all those oars. And McCallum ran most of the other boats, but I ended up really doing a lot of those youth trips. And I was always kind of aware of how the boat looked, because we took a lot of, people would point and laugh at our rigs, because, it was so unusual. It was an unusual craft, and so it was always important for me to get everybody to have a real regimented unity. Like, I would like to see all 4 oars hit the water at the same time, and when I said starboard, that was a clear and forceful command. And they often thought I was a drill sergeant or something in the military before I started doing this, but we ran a pretty clean boat. There was a lot of pride with how the boat looked and also our runs. And it was, to this day, and I've run a lot of the different boats, but to this day it's the funnest boat I've ever run. I'd love to reinitiate a few of those trips. I probably will before I'm done, but they were just like such a tight unit and such a group orientation to it. You really got to know each other on those trips.
I thought they were totally cool. First trip I did, we don't need to get off on this, but I did a Fred trip. You know, it was 71. I came in as a passenger. We saw one other company. Moody was the boatman, and we saw one other company, and it was Grand Canyon Youth Expeditions, and it was that rig. It was like September of 71.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, Moody was saying that's what you ought to do one of those. He was telling me, you know, that.
Yeah, he actually ended up coming to work for us, Tom did.
I always thought that was a really cool boat. And
Way
it
cool.
Ran way ahead of its time.
You know, I think Dick McCallum had a really good heart for a lot of things. You know, I look back on it, and at that time, the company was a nonprofit company, and he really did have a care for people that couldn't ordinarily do a river trip. He looked at the experiences paramount, and you know, he had a scholarship program for people that normally their parents wouldn't be able to afford them the trip, and I think conceptually they were brilliant trips. And actually, in the long haul, the demise of the youth program, it strained his and my relationship to a degree. But I understand why those things proceeded and progressed. The values started becoming more and more aware to everybody of the permit, you know, I mean, and you started looking and going, well, there are only so many permits. They've closed the door on this. And so the company started progressing into more of a commercial operation. So what we had to have the youth trips, but then to support them, we also had triple rig trips with those triple rigs. So we found ourselves doing a lot of triple rig trips. We did some youth trips. And then down the road, we did some snout trips that were commercial trips with kind of a peripheral youth program. And then finally, we started doing small boat, single boat commercial trips, and he phased out completely of the youth program because it really wasn't a breadwinner. And I think his, you know how it is when you do have a business and stuff, and you've got a family, and you know, I think it's pretty reasonable the processes that Dick went through with the company, but there was definitely a transition that occurred, and my position in that company was kind of like the little bird growing in the nest type thing, and I've always felt like we left on poor terms for such a long and fruitful relationship that we had, but I still really loved Dick, and when I walked out of his office, I never looked back. We spent about 15 years working with each other on that, and then the Bureau got caught with their pants down in 1983, and this was about the same time that things were pretty stressed and strained as far as our professional relationship with Grand Canyon Youth Expeditions. And so I started, I got myself on one of those federal listings of RFPs that go out for potential small business contractors, and this thing came across our desk that was for a Grand Canyon contract to take some scientists through Grand Canyon. So I got Mike Yard, who was a long-time part of mine, a lifelong part. He and I grew up together and stuff, and Tom Moody, and we put together this technical proposal, and of course we lied through our teeth on everything and won the project through a lot of scrutiny. Fred Burke wasn't real happy about it. He protested it twice, but it kept going across the governor's desk, and it kept coming back in our favor, and we won this contract, and it was supposed to be 12 trips, and that was in 1984, and then all of a sudden here we are, you know.
Well, that was for what?
It was for a multiple agency use logistics contract. I mean, the agencies involved were many. There was the original contract was through the Arizona Game and Fish because the Bureau needed a contracting agency. Okay, and then they subcontracted all the other stuff out. They felt like a scientist's position would be conflict of interest, I think, if they did the logistics. And so they put out an independent logistics bid. It was never written in that bid that you had to be a commercial permit holder. And so we jumped all over it. And it really, I think, blew a lot of people away that we won it because we were like totally out of the blue. They knew who we were, you know, and we were respected by the outfitters. I mean, it was during those times where they knew who the guys that were putting their time in down here were, and we were a couple of those guys, you know. And so we ended up with a contract. But it made some people kind of angry as far as the outfitters because they're going, hey, this is work that we're set up to do, and, you know, where are these guys coming from? So it was a joyous thing for us because we weren't outfitters and we had the work.
And that was GCS 1?
That was the first phase of Glen Canyon Environmental Studies, yeah, GCS 1. And that was what they called a technical lead-in to the EIS.
Well, did they foresee an EIS coming, or what?
I think so. I think so. You know, Dave Wagner was sharp on what he saw the future bringing, and he was very. I've never run into anybody with a work ethic like Dave Wagner, and he's sharp, and I think he saw it coming. And they established a lot of technical work to start a paper trail of data that would, you know, eventually, here we are 10 years later, that is really valuable comparison data to the stuff that they come up with now. And so I think he had a lot of vision on the fact that it would go through the EIS process.
Well, did you or he or anybody really think you were going to, that early on that work would lead to the kind of changes that we are seeing?
I think there was you know, anytime you get into a project, I know this is how I am, is I'm a kind of a dreamer, and I always think, hey, this could lead to something here, you know. But I don't think anybody had even an inkling of the mass that we'd end up with, I think that it really, to look back on all the effort that went into it, and then to see what we've gotten out of it, it's a surprise to me that it's been such a major force. I think there's kind of a dichotomy involved in that it's a good thing on one hand and it's a bad thing on the other.
How so?
Well, just the sheer presence of the scientific endeavor has been quite a visual and focused upon issue for quite a while now, and I think that is kind of the negative side of it, in that it's when you're coming through the Grand Canyon, you have a certain amount of influences on your senses, okay? Whether it's the sound of the water or the canyon wren or the rock slide or the sheer silence of the place quite often. And there's also a place for other parties and other human beings down here. You look over and there's a cataract boat floating by. And so anybody else that's here is part of that overall experience that you've got here. And so if you are present, some of those same faces are repetitiously present in that environment, which is you know, earmarked as being a pretty pristine experience and impression on people. I think that just that alone can become an annoying value. And I'll admit, also that the tools of our trade involve motors, they involve sport boats, they involve generators, they involve a lot of fairly aggressive looking and appearing procedure. And I think that is one of the negative values. But I think there's no end to the positive things that have been accomplished. And I think, it's just like, hey, you think about heart surgery, and I'm just creating this analogy, but it's an ugly thing to detail out them splitting open your rib cage and prying it open to get to the heart, to fix the heart. But if you don't fix the heart, that beautiful creature that you're fixing is going to die. And if you don't do some of these things in our environment, that they appear kind of ugly under the scalpel, but I think eventually once the scientists are gone and the information has led to some sophisticated way of handling this place, I think it's okay. And so I still think it's a justifiable presence. But, who likes to see somebody laying there with their heart hanging out, and I actually look at it that way, because I think before this process happened, this place was getting walked on by the Bureau of Reclamation. And, the custodians, the apparent custodians of the place, the sister agency in the Department of Interior, the National Park Service, there was a real conflict there. There was never any working order between those two agencies. And I think that alone has been a absolutely remarkable thing that's occurred.
That they have worked together.
And, we're kind of jumping around and stuff like that. But I think just to accelerate this, interview, one thing that will be an important accomplishment, what will be a major force as far as the work down here in Grand Canyon has nothing to do with the Grand Canyon. I think it's kind of a limelighted position we're in down here in Grand Canyon, and a lot of what has gone on, environmental work and stuff like that, is going to radiate out to the other systems, not only in the Southwest but all over the place, as far as procedure and how well this thing does, and the work that's gone on with the Glen Canyon Environmental Studies is going to fall under tremendous criticism, and it already is. Now everybody can take everything and in hindsight give a 20/20 visionary perception of how good was this or how bad was it. And so that we're going to have to take our lumps on that. But on the other hand, I think it's set precedent as to other systems, and how the Bureau and some of these other imposing forces like the Western Area Power and some of these things that really are encroaching on our wilderness, they're the forces that are doing that. I think they are at least being required to look a lot more clearly at the issues, the environmental issues. I don't think it's a perfect world. There's not going to be the shiny knight in armor that everybody loves for saving the environment, but there is going to be some really positive perception, I think, that comes from this overall process. It's hard for me to imagine, though, that they're going to completely change the way the Grand Canyon is, the way we know it down here today, by their management up there.
Do you detect a shift in their outlook, in the Bureau's outlook?
I think it's as different from night and day as to way the thing was operated pre-1983. I think it's as different as night and day. And I think also the structure of the Bureau, I mean, this would be terrible for too many of those guys to hear me say that, but they'd agree, I think, that the actual priority of the Bureau of Reclamation has really changed in 10 years. And they're more of a management company now than they are a development company. And I think that's probably a good thing. But they've done a lot of trimming of the fat in their own organization. But on the other end of it is, you look at the Department of Interior and the way things work, I think they've got more money than the rest of the guys do. You know, because they're a management organization that has power revenues coming directly through them, right? And so that's a good guy to work with, I guess, in the department. If they're the ones who are being required to spend some money on looking at the environment, well, they're the ones. I kind of wonder about where all the money goes with some of the other departments. You know, a lot of times big lumps of money are put into a management agency or something like that, and they've got other priorities too that maybe some of that money goes towards. Where I think this thing, at least the Glen Canyon Environmental Studies, has taken the funding and put it directly towards, you know, the science. I'm sure people will argue whether it was wisely spent on the type of science here and there, but it was spent on the science, and I think it was wisely spent money, and probably not all that much of it if you look at the overall power revenues. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket for how important it is.
What about this trip? How did it strike you, hearing about it and approaching it? What was your first impression, and then how have you felt about it as it has progressed?
All you had to do is look at the roster, and it was a complete honor to be involved with it. It was almost embarrassing to be asked to do it because there's so many other people that would have loved to do this trip, and you know they have surpassed my every expectation. Of course, guys like us, we don't get too many expectations going because we know that doesn't work. After a while, you run a lot of Grand Canyon River trips, and you got to pretty much hand it over and see what comes of it. And I personally, I don't know about you, but I personally don't get all wound up in expectations. But I was giddy before this trip. I had this wild dream. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
The night before the trip, you know, I knew I was going to have some, what we're calling old timers, and some legends, and some people you've heard about all your life. You know, the Grand Canyon. I mean, we've read all these books, and you know, we're going to have a cataract boat, and we've got Bob Rigg in one of them, and Lois, and all of these guys. And the first woman ever to traverse the Grand Canyon is on my boat. I know that's going to happen. I think it was really on my mind when I went to bed. And I used to just not be able to sleep before a river trip. I was so excited, and I'm sure you were the same way. I mean, I've always been pretty obsessed with the next gig and the next trip, but that's mellowed out through the years, you know. But I felt like a kid again going on one of my earlier river trips, and so I fall asleep, and I have this dream that I'm on the river and my boat's too small, and I'm running this boat, and all the people are really large, and Lois, who I had not met, but I've seen pictures through the years of Lois Jotter, you know, she is in my dream. And she's laying sideways on the front of the boat, and there's not enough boat, and she's just really like almost falling off every second, you know, and I'm driving down through the narrow little gorge. The boat's too small and the people were too big, and Lois was in the wrong place. So I know it had a lot of effect on my psyche this trip. No, then I got there, didn't really feel too good, but we rigged the boats, and I was really relieved, Lew, to see that the boat was bigger. It was big enough. You know how dreams are. They're weird. Probably shouldn't talk about them like that, but that was a funny dream. But the other thing about this trip is how remarkably interested these people are. They're kindred spirits. I mean, they are us. It's unbelievable. Like, we're still so interested, you know, and I've never done a river trip that I've regretted. And I've always loved this place. I've spent quite a bit of time in here. And it's amazing to me just that they're eating every moment up. And, you know, I mean, it's really had that kind of, you hate to use the word magic, but these people have really impressed me how totally into it they are.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's part of their spirit. I think they're the coolest people in the world.
What do you think they think about life kind of from that end of the program?
I think it's making them younger. I was talking to Kent today about that. I said, "How are you doing?" He goes, "Every single day I'm doing better, Brian." I think that puts it in a nutshell. It's the coolest thing in the world. And I honestly think I'm the same way, man. I don't spend very much time out of the canyon, but sometimes I'll go like a month without doing a trip, and like I fall apart after a month. It's like I'm a child again up there, and after about 5, 6, 7 days on the water, you start feeling yourself again, you know. And I think these people are just like that. They love this place, and they also it's a little more than just the place, you know. It's like the dirt, and it's more than the canyon for them. I think it's a soulful type thing, and I feel that from these people. You know, they're all, I think, responding to each other too.
Is that short?
An interview.
Well, you got to do a few sessions.
Yeah.
You think of all the stories, my God. I mean,
Yeah.
But I want to record them. I really do.
Oh yeah. Well, you will.
Well, here we are. Now,
One thing that comes to mind about this trip, though, is modern day packaging of beer like this must really offend the old timers. I mean, look at this. I mean, I don't mind old style. Any beer that's cold is okay, but I mean, what kind of packaging is this? That must offend them. You know, what do they think? It's a little embarrassing.
I think about all the changes that Lois has seen. Do you think about that ride, you know, from the first commercial trip to this?
And isn't she a doll?
Yeah.
She is an absolute doll. You know what I was saying though earlier before the tape changes. I feel that there's a real responsiveness to each other this group has, and I think they all respect each other. And I think that's really been the neatest thing. And I know that they respect us for what we're doing. And of course, you know, we'd give anything to be doing what we're doing for them. I'd do anything for any of those people. But I just feel a real mutual respect between them as a peer group. And I think they feel our respect for them, and the trip's been remarkable that way on that basis, you know. Kindred spirit would be the word. It's good.
Pretty unforgettable.
And I think everybody's going to get through here. Don't you? I mean, we
It
shouldn't.
looks pretty good so
We
far.
shouldn't count our eggs quite yet. What's going on down there?
Okay. Well, Jeff, can you think of anything? I guess we got to move this along or we're never going to get these other guys in.
Yeah.
Brian, I might sit you down. Well, we'll see. I'm going to have to sit you down again.
Yeah, I'll sit down with you again sometime. There's a lot of things that would be fun to talk about, and we should get them down. As a matter of fact, but I would like to interview you sometime, Lew. I'd like to turn this thing around, like maybe have you sit there, I mean here, and me sit there and interview you. And what do you say? Can we cut a deal right now?
Yeah, we can do
Lew, you there?
Okay, you're on. We'll have to do it.
We'll do it.
When will we do it?
Hey,
Maybe we can do it at the boathouse or something.
you know one other thing that's been really neat about this trip, go ahead and run this, is basically that guy's effort right there. As a matter of fact, let's turn this on real quick.
Don't go over that other thing, though.
No. This guy right there is good. First river trip. See, he's here with the old timers, and not to take anything away from the old timers, but this is the new kid in town right here. That Jeff. We want to bring him on some more trips. What do you think, Louie?
Oh, absolutely. Better sign him up. Oh, God. Okay, cut.
Okay.